Good evening. Welcome to We the People's Forum, a Braver Angels event where everyday Americans get time at the podium. The purpose of We the People's Forum is to hear from everyday Americans on the issues of the day. We hear from people of all races, classes, places, and politics, with a particular focus on hearing from working class Americans. And We the People's Forum is brought to you by the We the People's Project leadership team at Braver Angels, of which Rita and others on this call are part of. To learn more about that, you can visit www.braverangels.org/WPP, stands for We the People's Project. My name is David Lapp. I am a co-founder of Braver Angels, and I'm director of We the People's Project. I live in South Lebanon, Ohio, just about 30 minutes north of Cincinnati, where it has been storming tremendously tonight. I mean, I'm telling you, the house has been rocking. I am not kidding about that because of thunder and lightning. So our forum tonight is Rednecks, a co-worker and his actor brother speak up. Our forum will have, it's an act in 3 parts. So the first part, we're going to talk with our 2 main speakers, so I'm going to introduce in just a moment, setting the conversation table. And then in the second part, we'll expand the conversation to everyone else, we the people, to include time for Q&E time, questions and experiences. During that second part, we want to hear from you about your personal experiences of the issue, and anyone is also welcome to ask our speakers a question. And then in the third part, we're going to discuss actions that we could take individually or together to bridge the divide between people who see themselves as rednecks and people who don't see themselves that way. So we'll get into some action ideas. So our speakers are Brandon McCoy and Kevin McCoy, and they are brothers. Brandon McCoy is a professional actor, director, playwright, and stand-up comedian. He was born and raised in Huntington, West Virginia. He has written 1 musical and 7 full-length plays, including West by God, a semi-biographical play about America's urban-rural divide. Kevin McCoy has worked for over 2 decades in the coal industry and is currently employed as an environmental health and safety supervisor for DRA operations. He is an avid outdoorsman and lives in Rachel, West Virginia. Brandon and Kevin, welcome to We the People's Forum. We're so glad that you're here with us tonight.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I really like this organization. So thank you for inviting us to talk.
It is our pleasure and our honor. And to the rest of you all, we the people, thank you for being here. I'm glad that we're going to have this conversation. I look forward to seeing what emerges from this. So let's get right down to it. Kevin, we'll start with you. Feel free to unmute yourself, Kevin. Tell us about where y'all grew up. Give us a feel for the area and what it was like for you, Kevin, growing up there.
Okay, I actually grew up in a little small community of Lavalette, West Virginia, about 20 minutes south of Huntington. Pretty rural setting, obviously. Actually, I couldn't have asked for a better childhood in reality. I mean, the best of family and the tight-knit community was absolutely amazing. And, you know, we were brought up, you know, taught very good values, to be respectful people and to never be a stranger to anyone. It couldn't have been any more positive. You know, we were taught a great appreciation for the outdoors and how important it is to just be a good person to everyone on a daily basis, things of that nature. So, yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been a better childhood, in my opinion.
Brandon, anything you want to add to that description of growing up?
Yeah, the reason that I say Huntington so often is because it's if people have indeed heard of West Virginia, then Huntington is a place that they've maybe heard of. And so like Kevin said, we were raised in Lavalette, West Virginia, a town of about 500 people on the outskirts of Huntington, which we consider a city in West Virginia of about 45,000 people. And I completely agree. A love for the outdoors, a respect for people, especially a respect for your elders. It's now that I have lived in other places, It is a simple life, and I don't mean that as in any pejorative way at all. It's a simple, beautiful life, and I'm so grateful to have grown up in that kind of environment.
Mm, mm. So Kevin, tell us about what you did after high school and the kind of work that you got into and that you're doing now today.
Okay, I actually started my professional career in emergency services, security, EMT, confined space rescuer, firefighter, things of that nature. And then I continued doing that until the year 2000. And that's when I actually got involved in the coal business. Initially, I went to work at the coal docks, which ultimately at the numerous places that I was employed, we ended up transloading coal, shipping and receiving via all three methods: rail, barge, truck. And then once the coal industry started taking a pretty good hit, then I was laid off, and I was forced to move 3.5 hours north to find lucrative employment, because the opportunities back home, now that coal's been hurt, I absolutely had no choice. I mean, I miss my home desperately, and no place will ever be home. and I'm sure that Bub, would tell you the exact same thing. But the lucrative work in this, in this state is in this part of the state currently. So that's why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. And you work at, tell us where you work right now.
Okay, I work. I'm an operations manager for a refined coal facility at a power station. And what we do is we take the coal from their belts, and then we apply two different chemicals, one being a powder and one being liquid. And the sole purpose of doing that is then we mix it and then put it back on their belts, and it helps it burn cleaner. It reduces mercury and NOx emissions. Good for the environment. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
and you got to tell us. You told before we got started here. You told us about today. I mean, it's stinking hot out there, and you're there doing what today?
I shoveled 44 wheelbarrows of coal. Some days it's 60 to 70. So today wasn't quite as bad as what it is a lot of times, but it was probably, I would say, somewhere in the vicinity of 100 degrees in that building at the time. So.
Oh, good grief. So invite a show of hands here. If you ended up shoveling, more than 40 wheelbarrows of coal, just raise your hand and you'll get the award. But not seeing anyone raise their hand, I think, Kevin, you get the award for that. So Brandon, tell us about what you did after high school and the kind of work that you got into and that you're doing today.
Well, first, I'd like to say I did not shovel coal today. I sat in a Starbucks working on a play today. So, basically equal. I played sports. I did all the normal things that people do. When I was in school, I discovered that I really loved music, and I really loved performing. And I did a couple of plays late in my high school career. What's really interesting is that we didn't have an arts department per se. So it was a collection of schools getting together to put on a play. And I happened to take part in that. And so Kevin is my older brother. He's 9 years older than me. We have a sister who is 13 years older than me. So I was a bit of a late addition. That's a nice way of putting it. And I asked my parents, my mother and father both, if they would support me going to study acting. And they both, to their credit, two very wholesome blue collar people, said, yes, sure, let's give it a shot. So I went to Marshall University in Huntington, and I graduated 4 years later with a bachelor's of fine arts in acting and directing. And then shortly after, I felt like I needed to be in a professional market. So as soon as I graduated from Marshall, I applied for graduate school, and I was accepted at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And so I was a part of a 2-year Master's of Fine Arts programming there. And after that, I spent 17 years in Washington, D.C. as a working actor, director, playwright, musician, comedian, college professor. In my line of work, you tend to string together a full-time living with a bunch of part-time jobs. And that's what I did for 17 years. And now during the pandemic, my wife is from Oregon, and the West Virginian in me wanted to get back to, this is no offense to Maryland. I think Maryland is very pretty where we lived, but I wanted to get back to some mountains. And my wife, originally from Oregon, said, well, what if we gave that a shot? And so during the pandemic, we moved to Portland, Oregon, and I've lived here now for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm. And so Brandon, you've moved from to DC and then all the way over to Portland. So this is for both of you. Did you see yourself as rednecks growing up? And do you see yourself that way today? And for both of you, what's in it? What's in that term redneck? What does it mean?
I'll say that I grew up with that term being a term of endearment, like calling someone a redneck, growing up in West Virginia and calling someone a redneck was not pejorative in any way. It was a way of linking a certain kind of work behavior. Someone that wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty, right? And someone who wasn't afraid to work outside and get their neck red, right? And so I've always had a positive association with that word, and the term hillbilly, which I know is different, has a different connotation. But I'm like, yeah, I'm a hillbilly. I'll accept that. That's fine. I did grow up in the hills, and I did spend time outdoors in the summertime, getting my hands dirty and digging up worms and going fishing. I mean, I love that part of my background. And it wasn't until, and this is, where my experience and Kevin's experience probably differ from each other, but it wasn't until I moved away that I started to realize that there was this negative association attached to those terms.
Yeah, tell us about that. When maybe give us, if not the first time, one of the first times that you realized, oh, there's a negative association attached to this. Give us a story or give us a sense of what happened there.
People say that the hills of West Virginia sort of insulate it from other places. And I think that's true. West Virginia does have this aspect of it that is sort of encapsulated in hills and mountains. And it does feel like you're in a different place when you're there, which is one of the things I love about it. But that's not to say that we weren't aware that there weren't stereotypes associated. We were obviously aware of it. And when we would travel or we would go somewhere else, we maybe would experience a comment or two or a question or two that was a little off kilter. But when I moved to DC specifically, the thing that I remembered first is that I immediately became very proud of where I was from, because I kind of associated my identity with being a West Virginian. It was something that separated me from many other people in the theater. I didn't know many people then who were also from West Virginia who had pursued a similar kind of career. And so my first instance was introducing myself to people, telling people where I'm from, and immediately there being a sort of like, ooh, really? That's where you're from? Which I'm certain we'll get into has, political tones to it. But I think more there was a bit of an exotic nature to it as well. It's like, oh, I've never met someone from that place before. And what's interesting to me is that I was in Washington, D.C., right? Like there are many, many former West Virginians that live in Washington, D.C., which I come to learn. But we're talking about something that is a state away that oftentimes to me, when I would talk about growing up in West Virginia, almost felt like a foreign country to some of these people that I was talking to. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be consistent through my time there to the degree of even writing a play about it. Mm-hmm. I was so fed up with it, I wrote a play.
I want to hear you talk about that play. Sure. But when you say almost talking about West Virginia as like a foreign country, is it kind of like a pleasantly curious way of saying, oh, you're from West Virginia, blah, blah, blah? Or is there kind of like a pejorative edge to the questions and to the interrogation?
A little bit of both. I don't always speak with my original accent, but sometimes I do. And sometimes if I'm not thinking about it, I will revert to the way I used to speak. And it always elicits a question, where are you from? Where are you from? And sometimes it is, tell me more about what it's like to grow up in that place, because that place is almost always a place they haven't been. And it's a place that they know very little about. And then other times it is like, how did you get out? How did you get out? Because what I know about West Virginia is that it's a bunch of people who are married to their guns and their Bibles, and they stay. They don't go. They're afraid of the outside world. They don't go away. And of course, that upsets me. You know, that's very upsetting to me, because that wasn't my experience, nor was it the experience of everybody that I grew up with. So a little bit of both. I'll say my wife, who is from Oregon, in less of a hateful sense, received a very similar thing when we were in DC. It's like, oh, you're from Oregon, so you must be super, super liberal, right? And you must eat granola, and you're a vegan and all this. She received that too. So I do think that in this country we have a regional thing that is ultimately kind of a classist thing, that we associate certain behaviors and personalities with where you're from, because it is so vast and so diverse. So I understand it in one respect, but West Virginia to me is one of the very few places in the country that the associations with that state are almost entirely negative. It's coal, it's contributing to global warming, it is uneducated, it is people who talk with a thick accent that you can't understand, it's people who are devoutly conservative religious, which there certainly is that, but that's not all it is. And I always found that to be sort of the crux of the conversation.
Yeah, and I do want you to tell us about your play, but Kevin, I want to ask you, so I guess the stereotypes that Brandon just mentioned about redneck, for you, I guess, just describe yourself. What does it mean for you? What does it mean to be a redneck?
Actually, there's no way that I could agree more with Bo, in that I've always told everyone that the term redneck is an extremely broad term, and extreme to the negative side. But from my viewpoint, and the way that I view being a redneck or a hillbilly, whatever you would like to call it, is to the positive aspect of things. Something that signifies very hard work, very passionate, devout people, and not so much to the negative. But it is obvious that when the majority of the population think of the term redneck, it is toward the negative aspect of things as opposed to the positive. They think it's the person who only leaves the holler once a month, with their food stamps, and doesn't have any teeth and can barely, talk or plain English. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. Most every state has those types of people in some form or fashion, but it is not near to the extent, that West Virginia is depicted in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And was that something, so you travel a lot, you've told me, Kevin, but you spent almost all of your life in West Virginia.
Correct.
So, as Brandon was saying, you are aware of kind of the negative stereotypes of redneck growing up and living in West Virginia, but do you have a different experience than Brandon does, of Brandon going to DC and then out to Oregon with, like, do you experience more sense of kind of like, oh yeah, being a redneck is a wonderful thing, rather than the pejorative stuff, having lived in West Virginia for most of your life, than say Brandon, who's lived in those different places?
It's actually it's very curious in that I have traveled fairly extensively, and my accent brings up a lot of conversation. My very first incident, with someone that really had a negative opinion of West Virginia was actually at a basketball camp in Indiana. The very first individual that I met was from Georgia, and he noticed that I had a thick accent, and he inquired as to where I was from, and I said West Virginia, and his eyes got really big, and he said, "Wow," he said, "and you have on shoes." So me being me, I smiled real big, and I said, "Yeah, guess what? I've got all my teeth, and I'm fortunate enough that my parents were able to send me here just like yours did you." But the one thing that actually it kind of furthers on what Bub was saying, when they notice the accent, so they automatically ask where I'm from. Most of them think it's Texas. Never quite understand that one, but it is a great conversation starter. And what I find is, a lot of people will inquire as to whether or not the stereotype of West Virginia is true. And if so, what parts and to what extent? And the thing that is fascinating is these conversations get extremely lengthy at times. I mean, sometimes in excess of an hour, because they find it so interesting when I tell them all that this wild and wonderful state has to offer, not only aesthetically, but most importantly, by far the best part of the state of West Virginia is its people. And I think that anyone that would come to the state of West Virginia and actually spend some time in the communities would find that it is so much different than anything they could have ever anticipated. The only place we'll ever be home.
Brandon, you wrote a play, West by God, that I think you describe as semi-biographical. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So tell us about that and why you wrote that play, what it is, and how that relates to this conversation we're having.
It's interesting. One thing I respond to that my brother is saying that is a difference between the two of us that I've noticed, and frankly, it's really annoying, is how easily Kevin has always engendered himself to people. And no matter where we've gone together, Kevin makes friends really easily. It's always been much harder for me. And I've always felt like a little bit of an outsider. Even before I moved away, I felt just like that my brain worked a little differently, that I was just slightly askew. And that was no different when I moved to DC. I had a good period of time working as an actor and a director, and I was very lucky, and I met many wonderful people. But what I would say to you, David, in the interest of time, without going into deep, horrifying stories, is I would classify my experiences about wearing my pride for West Virginia on my sleeve in two ways. I would receive one of two different kinds of responses. In fact, one of them happened in New York City. I was visiting a friend at a really sort of swank, let's reimagine the taco kind of restaurant with craft beer. And this friend was also from West Virginia, and we were having a conversation, and we reverted back to our accents. And the waiter asked me, "Where are you from?" And we said, "West Virginia." And the guy says, "Oh, I've been to Richmond." And I'm like, "Well, that's the capital of Virginia. I'm from West Virginia." And he's like, "Is that somewhere near the ocean?" And I'm like, "Well, West Virginia, so it's west of Virginia, and it's its own state. In fact, it became a state during the Civil War. It's actually kind of a big deal." and he looked at me and my friend like we were full of it, like we were pulling his leg. And in our conversation after that, my friend and I said, "But we're the ones who are supposed to be intellectually inferior. Like, we're the ones who are supposed to not be educated, right?" David, that is one of 50 times that has happened to me in my life. And every West Virginian has a Richmond story. Everyone. Then on the other side of this thing.
But that particular thing, that particular reference, like Richmond, you mean like you're
Richmond or Norfolk or something along those lines. Like
not knowing that West Virginia is a state.
Literally not knowing that it's a state. It's happened to me. I can't even tell you how many times it's happened to me.
I had the same.
Then there's the other side. Sorry,
you've had the same experience, Kevin.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Then the other side of the sort of response I get is the more stereotyped side, which is like Kevin was talking about, not having shoes. Or I'll share two quick things. I worked in a couple of different university systems, had many colleagues whom I loved. I was sitting in a sort of like a group office space one day, and one of my colleagues came in, and she was talking about a vacation that she and her husband had just taken to the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. And I was talking about how beautiful it was, and they had rented a cabin, and they had had such a good time at this cabin that they were thinking about buying property there. Everyone knows I'm from West Virginia. Everyone knows how I feel about this issue. And she knew I was in that room. And she said out loud to everyone in that office, but the only problem with buying in West Virginia is that you have to deal with all those people. Mm. She said that. Mm. And I said, do you mind telling me what you mean by that? And she said, the gun-toting Bible thumpers. I said, that's interesting. That is what you choose to share in this group of people. But I think that's a big part of it, David. I think it was that group of people in this really liberal theater department in a university where they decided to share that opinion. Mm-hmm. So I decided to write a play because I was really mad. Mm. In this modern age of radical inclusivity, where the marginalization of everyone is off limits, for some reason that does not apply to the rednecks. And I want to know why. I want to know why. I want to know why rednecks are the last frontier of people that you can marginalize and get away with it. I think Bette Midler is a really good example of this. She was upset at something that Joe Manchin did. I get a lot of those phone calls. Anytime Joe Manchin does anything, I get a ton of text messages asking me how this is possible. I don't even live there. I don't know. Right. But I find in my ambassadorship, right, in my love of this place, I find that there is no separation between people and like behavior, right? And I'm finding that. So I write this play as an experiment of sorts. And the experiment is, let's do it in DC and let's see what the response is. And then let's also do it in West Virginia and let's see what the response is. And it was incredible. I mean, it was an incredible response in both of these places. And it kind of proved a point for me, which is we're not so different. We're actually not so different. Once you see these people on stage, once you see this story sort of activated, you go, oh, that's me. That's me. And I grew up in Iowa, or I grew up in Ohio, or I grew up in California. People we're so obsessed with how divided we are that we don't really pay any attention to how we're connected. And that's what I wanted to do with this play. And I love that play. And it was a personal success for me because it created a conversation that I always really wanted to have.
And politics. So maybe Kevin, maybe you could tell me, maybe politics have always been associated with, in some way, with the redneck term and stereotype. But it seems to me like it took on a particular life when with Donald Trump's candidacy. And you had maybe the Hillary Clinton's use of the word deplorables is in here as well. But I guess, and I know, Kevin, you lean more conservative, and Brandon, you lean further to the left than your brother. So let's talk about the politics of this a little bit. And how did, particularly with Trump becoming the Republican candidate in 2016, how has that affected this people's perception of redneck and here? How has the politics come into this? Kevin?
Well, actually, first and foremost, I did vote for Trump and was a Trump supporter, and would be in the future. if it comes to fruition. But make no mistake about it. I am not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a registered independent because I am not far right-wing conservative. I mean, obviously, I'm much more to the conservative side than I am the liberal side. But there were a number of things about Trump that I did not like as well. I mean, there were just so many times, for lack of a better term, he just could not keep his mouth shut. And I think another important thing to mention is a lot of people, as Bub mentioned, I've never met a stranger, and I love to socialize and talk to people, and I really feel that a lot of people felt that Trump put a dividing line between people. And now, before that was brought up to me, I didn't necessarily have that same point of view, but that is their point of view. So obviously I'm going to listen to it. And I can see to where maybe they thought, that he was, solely for the rich and, a certain class of people for instance. But I did fully support his economic approach. And during his tenure, we were growing. I mean, we truly were. And if there's one positive thing that you can say about Trump, he stuck to his word. What he said he was going to do, he did do. Now, I mean, you're also seeing that, to this day with the Biden administration, and he's sticking to what he said he was going to do too. But at this juncture, it doesn't appear that it's working out so good for the average American citizen. The comment by Hillary, I'd like to touch on that for a moment as well, because there's no way for me to term it other than, at first I had to think to myself, wow, did I just actually hear that from someone that is an incredibly important individual within our government refer to a group of people in that manner simply because that, number one, they're not in her party, because they're not extreme far left. I found it infuriating in reality that someone in that type of position would talk about the American people in such a manner. I mean, that was so disrespectful, not to just us rednecks and hillbillies, but anyone that leans, either moderate to conservative, in my opinion. And that was, I just don't think that that comment was very well thought out on her part. And I just do not. But first, most importantly, what this country has got to, to figure out is we have to find a way to find middle ground. All the way extreme far to the right is not going to be effective. All the way extreme far to the left is not going to be effective. We need to work together, not against one another. That's the very reasoning behind me being an independent. I've always told people this as well, that what bothers me so much about political parties, and of course the two major parties, is that anytime you put political partisanship, and in particular your party being in power, over the good of the American people, then you've got issues. And I think we're seeing that on a daily basis today. And something has to give, or this country is in serious trouble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Brandon, I'm curious for you, with Trump's candidacy, did the redneck term and stereotypes, did they become more salient with Trump's candidacy, or not necessarily?
Yeah, and I yes, and I think that I mentioned earlier Bette Midler, the comment, that the tweet that she made about West Virginians when she was upset with Joe Manchin, calling us.
For those of us who aren't aware, what's the context here?
She was upset that Joe Manchin didn't vote for Build Back Better. And she said, like the people, he wants the people of West Virginia to remain illiterate and strung out.
Mhm.
And what's interesting to me, David, is that let's replace West Virginians with any other group of people, and she's done. She's done.
Mm.
She's completely canceled at that moment. And she apologized and said that she was seeing red and that she was upset. To me, that's not good enough, because the hypocrisy of that, to me, in the fact that she would not have survived saying that about any other kind or group of people, that's inexcusable to me. That notion of hypocrisy is inexcusable. And that is as much on other people as it is. What I would share about Trump in particular is that it's really hard for me to separate the person from policy. And this is where Kevin and I certainly differ. And I will also say, if there are any West Virginians in this room right now, that this is also easy for me to say because I don't live in West Virginia anymore, because I felt like I couldn't do what I wanted to do for a living in West Virginia. And it breaks my heart, but that's the case. So from someone who loves that place, and that's my home, somebody asked me where I live, I say I'm from West Virginia, but I live in blank. That's what I always say. It's hard for me to separate Trump, the person, from the policy. I'm the kind of person that, like, if a celebrity does something really terrible, I can't watch their movies anymore because it's difficult for me to separate the creative from the creator. And I think that there was so that's the small part of it, right? Like, behavior really begets a certain kind of feeling for me. But then on the other side of things, in the bigger picture, to me, I think it's more of what is representative of someone like Trump that really bothers me. When Trump was elected, to many of my urban liberal friends who knew I was from West Virginia and not as liberal as them, would reach out to me and nicely say, talk to me. How could this be? How could this happen? And I would have conversations with them on my perspective on why that was. To me, I feel like Trump is representative of politics, understanding that you need a motivated voter. And a motivated voter is most easily accessible if you make them angry or you make them really scared. And I think this happens on both sides. I think on both sides, they're trying to take constituents and either really make them afraid or make them really angry. And it's apropos to this conversation too, David, because I also think it's a little bit of the West Virginia conversation that I deal with too. It's a we them kind of argument oftentimes. It's like, it's we and then them are West Virginians. They're so different. They think so different. They sound so different, you know? I feel like Trump and the way that he behaved is a result of that kind of a system where it's about, let's purposefully divide people. Let's do it on purpose. Because when you do that, you're going to have a very large group of people who are motivated for their personal interests. And so when I think of Trump and when I talk about Trump, it's hard for me to separate that fact.
Sure.
For me.
I do want to, during the third part of this conversation, I want to ask both you, Brandon and Kevin, about, so you can begin thinking about this. Brandon, that anecdote that you just shared about the person who made that comment about West Virginians being strung out, and I forget what the other term was, and you said that's
illiterate.
Unacceptable, right? That's unacceptable. That shouldn't be allowed. She apologized, but you think that I want to kind of ask you both about what, if we begin to imagine, okay, what are the kinds of things that could happen, the action steps that people could take at the individual level and that we could take at the community and national level to address, I think, Brandon, what you've called what you see as classism or prejudice towards rednecks. What are the kinds of things that we could do to begin bridging these divides in a good way? So begin thinking about that. And that's where we'll go, but we'll ask all of you that as well during the part. But right now, what we want to do is open this up to everyone here. So what we're going to do is anyone is welcome to ask a question of our speakers during this time, or if you have a direct experience about this issue, if you see yourself as a redneck or a working class, and you have or if you grew up or live in West Virginia or other parts of Appalachia. And if you have an experience that you want to share about this, raise your hand and share that in 3 minutes. And we just do ask that if you are, so it's either ask a question or share an experience. And if you are sharing an experience, for this part, stick to sharing your experience, because we find that it's our experiences that often tend to be very kind of depolarizing and enlightening and interesting as well. And then during the final part of this conversation, we'll get to action ideas about what can be done to bridge the divide. So I'm going to start calling on people. I'm going to ask you if you have a question or if you have an experience you'd like to share. Richard Aberdeen, you're up first. Do you have a question or experience? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Richard.
My comments are in response mainly to the more conservative brother, but both of them.
Richard, just to clarify, are you sharing an experience here, or are you responding?
Yes, I
Okay.
am. Yes, I am.
Good.
My experience is my grandfather was a farmer in Alabama. He was also a coal miner, so I can relate that way. I also wheeled wheelbarrows full of concrete in the hot sun, which I'm sure is as hard as coal. So I don't want you to think I'm a wimp when I'm saying this. I am now, but I wasn't. That one time I was different. So anyway, I grew up in California, and I have worked side by side in the hot sun in San Jose and other places that's extremely hot. It can get like 115 on the roof if you're a hot tower roofer. And I have found always in my life that people who are immigrants and who are Latino are among the finest people in the world. You don't get better people than these people. And what really made me angry about Trump has nothing to do with politics. It's when he started calling these people rapists and thieves, that was the end of it. And I think he belongs in prison for that alone. You should never be able to call a group of poor immigrants, which we all are in America. We all have immigration in our roots unless we're Black, unless we're Native. And we should never allow a politician to brand a poor immigrant as a rapist and a thief without them paying the consequences. And don't think twice. I am really, really angry about this because I know immigrants and I know how fine these people are. And I won't ever forgive that as long as I live, no matter what. He could save the whole world and it would mean nothing to me because of what he won't apologize. And I don't know how anybody could vote for somebody like that. I'm sorry, but I have no qualms about that.
I hear the passion in your voice, Richard, and grateful to
I'm
you for
also an
sharing your
independent.
experience.
I'm also an independent. I'm not a Democrat. So.
So David, I know this isn't the point, but can I respond just
Go
in
for
30
it.
seconds?
Sure.
So Richard, I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. And as somebody who lived in West Virginia and then moved away, the sort of thing that you said, which I largely agree with, is something that's been posed to me a bunch. And what I would say is that the people of West Virginia specifically, and I'm sure that there are other places, but in my opinion, the people of West Virginia have a lifetime history of people not giving a crap about them, literally not. And so whether someone sees it as lip service or not, when someone talks about them and says, I actually care about what you care about, that is really, really meaningful. It is. And so like, I completely respect your opinion and I agree with much of what you said. What I would say is that there are many people in West Virginia who want to put food on their table for their families, and they're going to vote for the person that they think will help them do that. And if it's that they don't like those things that he says or those things that he does or that he stands for, what ultimately comes down is providing for their family. So it's not always just a conversation of for these people in a certain class. It's not always a conversation of doing what's morally right. It's about the day to day of can I make a living? Can I get a paycheck?
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you again for your comment, Richard. Let's go to Carlos. Carlos, do you have a question or an experience you'd like to share?
Experience. First of all, thank you to the two brothers. And I'm a redneck. Really? With brown skin? Heck yeah. I used to travel the country to watch NASCAR races in the South. And I walked into a bar to eat, and the good old boys looked at me like, whoa, what are you doing here? And I gave them the finger. I gave them the three fingers, which is to signify Dale Earnhardt Sr. And they looked at me and they nodded. We were the same tribe. And I have fraternity brothers, mountaineers from West Virginia. And they say they're hillbillies too, and they're college educated. So you guys speak the truth. And I'm Hispanic, and I voted for Trump twice as a Hispanic redneck. Yes, sir, from California, nevertheless. Thank you for this program.
All right, so Carlos, redneck Hispanic. Thank you, Carlos. Question or experience you'd like to share?
One very short comment, which is that I have been to West Virginia, and I actually work for an environmental testing company. So people who say that West Virginians don't care about the environment, that is an erroneous assumption about not only just about West Virginians, but about quote unquote rednecks or blue collar people or people who carry guns. That has not been my experience. I grew up in New York. So my husband says I'm a city girl with a country heart and country brain. But I did have a question for Brandon, which is that, you know, like you, as a person of color who's also conservative, I kind of feel like I'm an ambassador of sorts because people make assumptions about me that are often erroneous. But I'm wondering, what do you think blues or liberals could learn from West Virginia culture that they don't understand right now?
That's a fantastic question. And I find it's largely Appalachian in my experience. Like this, it's basic human kindness, right? But it's also time. To me, it's really time. Kevin and I, our grandfather died in the middle of a blizzard and frozen ground, and people that we didn't even know did whatever they could to make sure that we could bury our grandfather. And we would say things like, only in West Virginia, right? Like that's something that would happen in West Virginia. Well, that's true. That does happen in West Virginia, but that's also a little short-sighted of us as well. That doesn't just happen in West Virginia. I think a reminder of common decency and a care for people is really what it boils down to. If we don't succumb to this notion that we're being manipulated to be different, like, yeah, we're different. That's okay. Let's celebrate that. But where aren't we similar? Because in my experience, I have mined much more commonality between people than I have the differences. And I think that that's what it is. People need to be able to look at somebody and go, oh, that was me once. So if we can connect in that way on a person-to-person level, knowing someone's name, knowing their story, I think that that's the way we get to a greater kindness in a way.
Thank you for that question, E. Let's go to Dwayne. You have a question or experience you'd like to share, Dwayne?
An experience. I find myself really grooving with Brandon McCoy. I was born and raised in East Texas, a little town outside Dallas. And somehow how I experienced things was so unlike everybody else in my family, everybody else in my neighborhood at a certain level. It's not that they didn't understand me and I didn't understand them at many, many levels. But I found that I had an inquisitiveness that made me misunderstood and sometimes untrusted. That I was more interested in the boundary between two groups of thought than in the values of either group of thought. And so similarly to Brandon, I had to leave Texas in order to fully to fully develop. The thing that decided that for me, finally, I knew it since I was 10, but I was in a freshman year at University of Texas, Austin, and living in an off-campus dormitory with a roommate. And one night, a fellow named Jim Love from Commerce, Texas, came in stumbling drunk and said to my roommate, "Gary Kaufman, you come out to the hallway here. I'm in a mood to trash a Jesus killer." And I said to him, "Jim, you don't know what Jesus would have to say to Gary. You don't know what Jesus would have to say to you in this moment. Get the hell out of here." And he says, "Dwayne Wilder, you stand up, I'm going to beat you up right where you stand." And I said, "I'm not going to give you the dignity of standing up. Get out of here." And he was so unused to being addressed with no deference whatsoever that he kind of stumbled his way out. And I knew that this was an epitome of the kind of energy that I kept accumulating to myself in Texas. It wasn't a judgment on Texas. It was a judgment on whatever brought me into this world.
Dwayne, thank you. Brandon, is there anything you want to say in response to that?
No, I really appreciate that. I do. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think I am as loyal of a West Virginian because I went away, and because I'm able to value it because I went away, and there's so much of what you're saying that resonates with me. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dwayne, we gotta go to the next. We gotta go to the next person now. So thank you, Dwayne. Nancy Sutherland, question or experience?
Experience. I grew up in West Virginia, youngest of 4 children who all grew up in West Virginia. The exact Bette Midler quote was poor, strung out and illiterate. So you left out the poor part. Just wanted to say that all 4 of us, the children in my family, grew up to be very successful. My sister, who became an executive with a big pharmaceutical company, said nothing gave her more pleasure than sitting in meetings in the big conference rooms, and people would go around and say they went to Harvard, they went to MIT, and she'd say, "I went to West Virginia," and I'm there. So it was great. One of my brothers owned a company in Hawaii for 50 years and just moved back to Wheeling, West Virginia after 50 years in Hawaii. And so people think I'm crazy, but nothing, he's just thrilled to be back. I want to see your play. So I hope you have that play come out someplace else. That I currently live in Texas, so I don't live in that area now. But the other comment that I wanted to make is I think as a former West Virginian, very proud of where I'm from too. And I think that's a very common theme. We all kind of feel like if I meet somebody else from West Virginia, we're instant friends and sisters or brothers. Is that I think we're just kind of reasonable people who are generally kind of independent as far as our voting purposes. I recently lost a full-time position as a director in a company because I didn't want to use my pronouns on my Zoom calls and emails and stuff. And I think most people from West Virginia would be like me, like, that's ridiculous. So I actually lost my job over it from a very blue organization. And it seems so utterly ridiculous to me. And I think that's the way West Virginians typically are. So it's very disheartening to me to see the type of comments that some politicians have made about us too. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Nancy. I'm going to go to Michael Tilrico. Michael, do you have a question or an experience? And if you are, do you have video, Michael? If we can see you, that'd be even better. But if not, we understand.
I don't have video set up right now. Sorry.
No worries.
So I would like to share an experience. I actually went to college over in that town that we shall not speak of in Blacksburg, Virginia. But college freshman, straight out of high school. I went to, I was in the chemical engineering department at Virginia Tech. And in my English 101 class, the very first thing that my English teacher said to all of us was that, how did he put it? He said that speaking or having the dialect of redneck is the dialect of idiots. And if you want to become an engineer, we need to first teach you how to stop sounding like an idiot. And that was actually something that took quite a lot of time in my freshman year of college, was basically going through speech therapy. They put us through speech therapy so we can stop talking Southern, I guess is the better way to say it. And you know, me being, I guess, naive and dumb at the time, I just agreed with it. You know, I didn't think to myself, oh, this is terrible, or this is, you know, marginalizing people, or anything like that. I just said, okay, well, you know, we can't speak like this in a professional environment, so thus we must learn to speak the dialect of what you should speak in a professional environment. And I'm sure you can't tell anymore, but I have pretty much no Southern accent. But you know, that's what I learned, because that's in my formative years in college, that's what people told me, is that I could not speak that way and hold a professional job at the same time.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to call one more person, and then we're going to go shift to the action part of this. So I know we've got lots of hands up, and I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to all of you. I wish we could, but I do want to. Phyllis Powers, you had chatted me. Go ahead, Phyllis, and did you have a question or experience you wanted to share, Phyllis?
I have a question. It's for Kevin. Kevin, you really surprised me tonight, because I was expecting to hear the usual slang terms about rednecks. You know, the description is usually they're racist, they're anti-immigration, anti-government. And so you really surprised me, you know, your description of a redneck as being a term of endearment, and that people who are not afraid to get their hands dirty, etc. The term redneck was something that Black Southerners actually coined for the brutal and cruel white racists in places like, you know, the South in America. They had coined other terms such as poor white trash and cracker and peckerwood alongside with redneck. These were all derogatory terms that when whites turned their backs, that Blacks would say about them. And so I guess that term redneck just sort of took on its own course, and that's where we are today. But my question for you, Kevin, is, you know, one of the underlying, you know, statements that people make about rednecks is that they have a fear of seeing people come in and take their jobs. And would you comment on that? Is that a fear that you have experienced as a redneck, that, you know, immigrants, Black people are going to take your job, or your jobs, or maybe move into your neighborhood, or they're the reason why our taxes are so high because we're paying for their expenses, etc. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Phyllis. Kevin.
You know, actually, as far as someone moving in, you know, to take my job personally, you know, I do not feel that way at all. And it definitely has nothing to do, you know, with, you know, if someone's an immigrant or if they're of a different race or what have you. You know, I like to believe that the reason that I would remain stable in my position is that I'm extremely passionate and dedicated, and I can perform my job at a very high level. So no, I do not feel threatened with that whatsoever. The one comment that I will make, though, is the one thing that is troublesome, you know, to a lot of the workers within the state of West Virginia, actually Kentucky, Southern Ohio, even Tennessee and Virginia for that matter, is the political decisions that are being made by some, you know, for instance, to completely move to the new Green Deal, which in the current times in which we live, it's an absolute impossibility for that to be achieved. And everyone would think that because I work in coal, that I would totally be against green energy, and there couldn't be anything farther from the truth. I just do not think that we have the infrastructure in place for that to be incorporated. I think there needs to be a balance found, between the two, as opposed to, so it is political decisions that are being made by one side in particular that becomes a threat to a lot of West Virginians. I mean, let's all face it, even to this day, as much as coal has been damaged, it is the basis to this day for the economy of the state of West Virginia. As I mentioned earlier in the cast, was that I now reside 3.5 hours north of home. I'm still in West Virginia, of course, but I'm away from my mom. I'm away from very close family and friends and community. And not that I don't enjoy the people up here, because I do. I love the people. As I said, I'm a very social person. So I enjoy these people as well. But no matter what, it's still not my part of West Virginia. Home will always be home. So I hope that answers your question to the fullest.
Yeah, I want to add something to what Kevin was saying, if it's okay, Kevin.
Sure.
And thank you for your question, Phyllis. The first thing I would say is that the term redneck to me has no racial affiliation whatsoever. I appreciate that it maybe once upon a time did, but to me, I would call anyone of any race a redneck if they had like a certain aspect to their character. The second thing I just want to say about coal and green energy, as the big thing being on the outside of this and living in predominantly liberal cities, to me, the thing that I experience the most is this notion of we got to get rid of it. We got to get rid of it. We got to get rid of it. And not just that, we got to get rid of all the fossil fuels. Okay. But what about the people? That's always my question, which is, yes, okay, I'll go along with 75, 80, 90% of what you're saying. What about the people? Call me biased, but I love my brother, right? And like, I want him to be able to make a living. I want him to be able to support himself. So again, I would come back to this notion of talking to us, right? Like talking to people who work in this industry, like the notion of being replaced. I'm not sure that most about like immigrants with immigrants. I'm not sure that most West Virginians would probably even have that conversation because the jobs are so few and far between to begin with. So more it's about a notion of, okay, if not this, then what? And if there is help to be had, then where is it? Then where is it? And do you care? Which I also think comes back to this notion of I don't know how I feel about the book Hillbilly Elegy at all. I have really trouble. I have trouble with that book, frankly. But even though my dad worked for that same company, I have trouble with that book. But what I would say is that a classist notion of poor people are poor because of a perpetuation of a certain lifestyle is a very narrow-minded way of looking at things. When you live there and you're in it and you look around at what's available, that becomes a whole other notion altogether. That's what I would say.
All right. Well, thank you again for that question. And thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions and experiences, but if everyone could, if you could put your hand down, because we're going to go to the next part of this, which I'm going to go back to Kevin and Brandon, you both first for this, and then we're going to open it up to everyone. What are some actions that someone might take at the individual level to bridge the divide between people who see themselves as rednecks and those who don't? And also at the bigger level, some actions we could think about at the community or the national level. What are some things that could be done to bridge this divide? And that's a question for both of you. Feel free to, whoever wants to take that first.
I'll go ahead.
big brother. Yeah.
Wait, is that okay?
Yes, please. Please.
Okay. Absolutely. My answer, actually, both with individually and within our communities, can be summed up very simplistic in nature, actually. It's communication. We have to communicate with one another, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of your political views. It's all about communication. Going back once again, I make it a point to have conversations with numerous people on a daily basis. And it is the little things that make a difference. And in that conversation, don't just speak, with your points of view. Listen to what the other individual has to say. Ask them questions like, okay, you believe differently. Could you explain to me why you feel that way? Can you explain to me what experiences may have made you feel that way? And if there is areas that we disagree, then I can give my point of view, and then maybe we could take, both points of view and find that compromise to where we understand one another. But there is some middle ground to be found. Absolutely. And as I stated with the little things in life that make a difference. I mean, one kind act per person per day can change the entire world if we just make it a point to do as much. Ask yourself at the end of every day, was I the best person that I could possibly be today? Chances are the answer is going to be absolutely not. And that's why you say to yourself, I'm going to strive to be much better tomorrow. Little things such as opening a door for people, smiling, saying hello, helping someone change a tire. Little things like when you see a funeral procession coming your way, you pull off to the side of the road. Me, normally I'm in a ball cap. I take my ball cap off. I put it over my heart in respect for those people and understanding what a nightmare they are currently going through. And, that people notice this type of thing. I found it very, very strange that in a lot of places in which I have traveled, that so many people are shocked when you hold a door for them. And they're like, wow, people around here don't do that anymore. And I'm like, really? That is second nature, to everyone I know in West Virginia. It's a way of life. It is what we do. And I really just think that if you keep the lines of communication open and you show examples of being, as simply as can be put, a good person at every opportunity that you possibly can, it makes a difference. And that is a way to bridge that gap. Communicate. I truly believe that it's that simplistic in nature. Get out, talk to people, go to fairs, things of that nature. It's
Brandon, what about you?
I love my brother, the idealist. I love him. Listen, Kevin is a good Facebook follow. You should become his friend. It's all kinds of Hallmark cards just like that, which is beautiful. It really is. It is. It's beautiful, Kevin.
Way to go, bub.
It's beautiful. I have I love that perspective. And I think you're right. I think it is communication. I would add that I think it takes people like Kevin and me, whenever we are around people and we hear those things, to say, okay, don't say that, right? Like, don't say that. You wouldn't say that about X, so don't say that about Y. I think in very small terms, that makes a difference over time. Even people within my own married family have said things sometimes not about West Virginians, they know better, but they will say something adjacent to West Virginians. And I'll say, come on, you know better. Don't do that. And that has an impact. And I think that has an impact that lasts over several people. But the big thing for me is in culture, and in my perspective and in my experience, it's the arts. I think the answer to this is the arts. I think the answer to most things is the arts. The arts gave me a voice. The arts gave me a platform. And that platform allowed me to write West by God and to have that performed. And West by God created a conversation that I never would have been able to have otherwise. And one of the things that's happening in the professional theater, which I'm proud of, is that it is looking at our world and trying to become more inclusive. And the thing that I would just urge these theaters to do, movie producers to do, television producers to do, is to also think about rural America as well. I think that representation matters. And I think that hearing the stories of Appalachians, of rural Americans, will allow people who think that they are vastly different from those people to go, oh, wait a minute, we're not. We're actually not. And David, as soon as that barrier is crossed, anything's possible. It really is. As soon as you go, oh, you're a person and we're not so different. You can talk, you can have ideas, you can compromise. And I think art is one of the ways in which we can do that. I think it's one of the most immediate and powerful ways in which we can do that.
I want
Brandon,
to say that
hey, Jay, I'm so sorry. We want to follow a process here. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna.
Could you put me in line, please? I don't
absolutely because I know you're Mama Ball. I'm gonna put you in line.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I know her son David, and Brandon. Real quick, if somebody wanted to learn more about the play West by God, how would we learn more about that?
You can go to my website, brandon-mccoy.com. You can read about it there. If anybody here wants to read it, I give copies to anyone who asks. I think it's it was a project over many, many years that was obviously really close to my heart. One of the things that Kevin and I didn't get the chance to talk about today is that one of the things that the play tries to do is to honor our deceased father. And the play digs into a little bit about what we've learned from him and how that is a big part of who we are, and also a big part of identifying ourselves as West Virginian. Yeah, and if you know any big time producers out there, it's available. You just let me know. Let me know.
I do want to see too if the rumor had it that Mama McCoy was going to be here, and I want to see if she made it. Mama McCoy, are you in the Zoom room?
Here's what I can say. I can say that she is here, but it is highly unlikely that Mama McCoy is going to talk to this group.
Okay.
What I will say is highly likely is that Mama McCoy is going to talk to the two McCoy brothers and tell them what they did wrong.
All right, we'll settle for that. We'll hear it from you all later. Well, Mama McCoy, if you're here, we're glad that you're here, and you raised two fine gentlemen. So I want to go now to a couple of ideas to get on the table here on what do you think about what are some actions that we could take at an individual level or community level to bridge the divide between people who see themselves as rednecks and those who don't. Just take a minute to say your idea. Let's get some ideas on the table here. And let's start with you, Carol. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm in Wilmington, Delaware. I grew up, and just to echo what Kevin had to say, I grew up in Michigan. I went to grad school in Boston. I was the higher level person, higher on the hierarchy, grad student, but I would go to the stock room and would talk with the guys in the stock room and say, hey, how about them Celtics and whatnot? And they were just so flabbergasted that I would talk to them. And I'm like, I'm from Michigan. It's what we do, you know? So I echoing what Kevin had to say is just acknowledge that the other person is also a human being, you know, and if you want to get all touchy feely about it, it's namaste. But I mean, you know, just reach out to them. And then and as far as what I would do, I'm actually active in the local community theater, and I will be reaching out for a copy of this play. We might need to do that.
Got it. You got it.
Ooh,
You
there
let
you
me know.
go. We can put you in touch, definitely. Lisa Hall, your idea.
Very quickly, I also agree that for anyone to say negative things about a group of people, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Bette Midler or Donald Trump, is deplorable. That's what's deplorable. My idea, and this is something that as soon as Donald Trump became more popular before the 2016 election, I thought that for sure the Democrats were going to win. And I thought that Hillary Clinton should first thing send out some really high level people from her campaign all over the country to do listening sessions, particularly in economically challenged areas of the country, and have like a town hall where you just listen and you write down everything that people say, what their problems are, what their needs are. And then those high level advisors would come back to Washington and they would craft some policies that would try to address those issues. And in doing that, we would really have brought our country back together again. Of course, it didn't happen. It didn't happen on a lot of different levels, but I think that still is something that we could do.
Interesting, yeah. And by the way, you know, Braver Angels, we do have something called Braver Angels town halls that aren't well known, but that is in our toolkit that we could explore. It's a very interesting idea. Jim.
I moved from New England to Versailles, Kentucky. There had been a plant factory that made thermostats for appliances and pressure switches for air conditioners. It had been started and successfully built up by a local guy who everybody in the plant loved him. 15 years later, he retired. They brought in an outsider. It took 2 years for the plant to go into the crapper. I came in, just as an aside, I lived across the street from Danny Hatfield. He was a radiologist, told great stories about the Hatfields in Kentucky and the McCoys in West Virginia. But we had 3 shifts, met with every employee in small groups in all 3 shifts. And I didn't tell them what to do. I asked them, what do we need to do to be successful? It's important to maintain these jobs. And respect. I think that's a key word. And we were the most successful plant the company had 2 years later. We had fish fries. We had people had to take some time off in the fall to, as a community in each little development, to slay the pigs and prepare them and put them up. And we brought some of those pigs in and for the Christmas party for the plant, the best pork I've ever eaten. But I think you have to show respect. People aren't dumb. They know what was needed. They needed to have a chance to tell you, and they were so committed to making it happen. That's what I think we need to keep doing.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to call on 3 people who haven't spoken yet, and that's going to conclude our action time. And then we're going to hear from an idea for a next step that we could take from this conversation. And Len, I'm going to ask you to share something then. Let's hear 1 minute. Your action ideas, Miranda, Victoria, and then R. Michael Martins. Miranda, go for it. Oh, we can't hear you, Miranda. We had this problem early on. Well, so sorry it doesn't work out, but well, hopefully next time we can get it figured out. Oh, yes, and somebody just reminded me I was supposed to call on Mama Ball too. Okay, so Victoria, Michael Martins, and then J Ball, or not J Ball, Mama Ball. Victoria. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Victoria.
Hey, so I'm Victoria. I'm from Greenbrier County, West Virginia, so across the state from you guys. Thank you so much for this. This has been amazing. My suggestion would be if you are a person who's not from West Virginia or Appalachia or rural America, just look around in your life for somebody who is and talk with them and ask them why they think the way they do, and just try to start from the assumption that this person's whole life experience has led them to their worldview. And if you understand that life experience, you can understand why they have that worldview. And if you are from West Virginia or Appalachia or rural America, speak up. We have to be ambassadors for our land and the people that we came from.
Thank you, Victoria. Let's go to you, R. Michael Martins.
I grew up in Iowa where it was maybe 50-50 Democrat and Republican, moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where it's 70-80% Democrat. And I want to echo what some other people have said. The two biggest things are, first, respect for people that are different from you. And second, try to communicate with them. I talked with a friend of mine and who's a liberal Democrat. And he said, why would I want to talk to Republicans? I want to talk with people like me. And I'm like, roll my eyes. And there's a local online newspaper called MinPost here that I used to read regularly when Donald Trump was elected. I had to stop reading it because of all the hate and just horrible, horrible things that were being said about him. And even now that Joe Biden is elected, I haven't went back because it's like, I don't want to be around people that are that hateful. So respect and communications, that's the key. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's go to you. I'm sorry I'm forgetting your first name, Mama Ball, but you're up.
Erica.
Erica, right, go for it.
Well, let me just say, my son is a professional actor, and he acts at the Greenbrier Theater, the one in Louisburg. I think I have the name right.
Yeah, it's in Lewisburg.
Lewisburg, yeah. And he's come there, I think, about 7 seasons. And last year, I think maybe it was before COVID. He was in To Kill a Mockingbird, and we went down to see it. And I loved the town, and I loved the theater, and hopefully he'll get another role in another season now that things are back. But I loved what I saw. And the way I met my husband was folk singing. My husband played the guitar and I sang, and our mutual love of music brought us together. And of course, country music, all different kinds of folk music were things that we grew up on. Just to let you know, I'm 85 years old and my husband's 87. And so our music is folk music, and certainly the music of Appalachia is part of that. So those are my only contacts with West Virginia. I know it's its own state. I know how it came about. I also know about that its main product is coal, and I empathize and suffer with the families of those who have Black lung disease and how much of that is part of the everyday life of the miners. And I am an advocate of green energy, and there is a plan to retrain miners for good paying jobs for clean energy, where they won't have to suffer the illnesses and the deaths and the tragedy of Black lung disease.
Take
And
about 15 more seconds, Erica.
okay, that's the thing that I hope that the people of West Virginia will latch onto and really, I mean, it's a lifesaver. And I know that generations of people have worked in the mines, but this is your way out. Grab
All
it.
right. And we're going to have to leave it there, Erica.
Okay,
And
thank you.
so, right, we're going to have a last word from Brandon and Kevin before we head out here tonight. Len, you want to share an idea here for a next step that people could take. Go ahead, Len Breslow.
Yes, we're going to try a workshop that's rather different from what Braver Angels has done before. We've done finding common ground workshops between reds and blues, where they try to find some agreement on a problem. But we'd like to try one between working class people and elitists, let's say. We don't know the words we don't know the right words in this country, but upper middle class or whatever you want to call them, to find common ground on an issue. So if you're interested, there's my name and my email address there, and we'd like to we need to have equal numbers of people from working class and from elitist groups.
Thank you, Len. And Len is helping to organize that. So yes, please be in touch. And if you're not a part of Braver Angels and you like what you see here and you want to be a part of a community that is trying to communicate across the red-blue divide, the rural-urban divide, redneck, non-redneck, all these divides, join us. Join us as a member. It's only $12 a year. And you can go to braverangels.org, click support us, and join us and become a member. There is also a link in your chat right now. Apple, if you want to, Apple just put on a chat the link to the We the People's Project, which you can learn more about what we do there. And then also, if you could just put it in again, Apple, so it's the last thing that people see, a link to feedback. We would like for you to give us your feedback on this We the People's Forum, and also to suggest ideas for future We the People's Forums. So copy and paste that link that is in the chat, and let's see. Let's just put it in there again, Apple. I'm just going to give it a second. And what I want you all to do is to copy and paste the link. We're not going to fill it out right now, but if you could, please copy and paste it so that you can fill it out later. So we'll get that up in just a minute there. But for now, I want to go to our last word. Check out from our two speakers, Brandon McCoy and Kevin McCoy. What are you taking away with you from our conversation tonight? What are you taking away with you from our conversation tonight?
Take it away, older brother.
You want me to go ahead?
Yeah.
Actually, I think a lot was achieved, and as Bub touched on earlier in the conversation, all of us are not that dissimilar. In reality, we are actually very similar, and I really think that if we make a concerted effort, with some of the things that I mentioned earlier, is try to be a better person every day, and most importantly, communicate. Most importantly, listen. And the world can be a better place. It truly can. At the end of the day, guys, no matter how you look at it, we're all Americans, and we have to find a way in which to work together to achieve the common good for all involved. And it is doable, and it's sustainable. but it will take each and every one of us to achieve this goal.
Thank you, Kevin. Brandon.
Well, I am really appreciative of this organization. I think that what y'all do is admirable in a small idea, right? Like, it's the fact that you're so open about trying to create this conversation is really kind of brave, actually, because I think the whole system is kind of against you. I think the system is devised to try to stop people from talking to each other. So I'm very thankful for Braver Angels to have this conversation and to bring my brother into this conversation, whom I love and who I think has an incredible perspective, and has taught me a lot, whether he knows it or not. And it kills me to say that. But what I will say is that my worldview, being a West Virginian, has been that of the little guy, you know, a chip on my shoulder, something to prove. That's helped me a bunch. You know, it's made me a really successful actor. It's made me be able to talk to people in certain ways that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise. And it's made me really appreciate the stop and smell the roses sort of thing. You know, I've been able to do that. And I think I've been able to do that because of where I'm from. And if there's anything to take away from anything that my brother and I have to offer, which is that we are really different from each other. I'm better looking. He's not as good looking, you know, for example, no, we're so different from each other. We could not be as opposed on certain things as we are. And we love each other. And we love each other. And we talk a lot. And we argue a lot. And we care still about how your day's going and about how your life is going and what your dreams are. I think a very simple question to ask ourselves is like, what would your brother do? If you have a brother, and you're lucky enough to have a brother like I do, what would your brother do in this instance, right? So in moments where you feel super divided or different or outside, what would your brother do? Would they listen to you? Would they be okay with the fact that you're different or that you have a different idea? I think there's something really valuable in that. And that has taught me a lot. And it's allowed me to be the artist that I am. And I hope that all of you, as a final word, will visit West Virginia. I hope you will go and love it as much as we love it. I hope you will fish and hike and camp and enjoy the great outdoors. I really hope you will, because it is almost heaven.
Yeah, come visit. Look us up. We'll take you to our cabin, our family cabin, in the big mountains of West Virginia in the Eastern Panhandle. It is truly something to behold. And I'd also like to add that thank you everyone for being here. It's truly been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of something of this magnitude. Thank you very much.
Well, our gratitude to both of you. And yes, as Erica Ball also said, and go to the theater in West Virginia.
That's right. And look up Alan Ball. He's a professional actor who comes to that theater.
Excellent. I just put again the link to the feedback form in the chat. Our next We the People's Forum, by the way, is going to be on Is It Time for a Third Party? One of the one confirmed speaker we have is another West Virginian co-worker, Bo Copley. He ran for the Republican nomination in West Virginia for a Senate seat a couple of years ago. And there was a documentary made about him, The Campaign of Minor Bo. He's going to be one of the speakers. And we're also lining up other speakers for that. Is it time for a third party? We the People's Forum. That's our next one, July the 11th. Well, everyone, it's been wonderful having this conversation with you. Let's go out there and build a house united.